Hi, this is Dave, and before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners. And that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars. Why, hello there. This is Dave, and you're listening to What Does Star Wars Mean to You? This is the show where we talk to all kinds of fans of Star Wars, from industry insiders to indie artists, from mega collectors to obsessive mythologists, to find out how Star Wars impacted their life. Here's the thing. Star Wars has become so divisive that it's almost impossible to talk about it without starting a hate debate. So let's change the conversation from what is right or wrong with Star Wars to what does Star Wars mean to you? Today is episode 2, and it continues my conversation with Javier Grillo-Marxuach. Now, he's an Emmy-winning writer-producer, a showrunner, a prolific writer of content, essays, comic books, and television, and a podcaster. He has worked on such genre content as Lost, The Dark Crystal, Age of Resistance, Cowboy Bebop, Raising Dion, and The Witcher, just to name a few. I had the pleasure of working with him when I promoted his original series, The Middleman, on ABC Family. Now, if you missed the last episode, you can go back and listen to it, or you can just hear kind of my summary here. He talked about his year without Star Wars, where he took a year just to stay away from Star Wars and wrote a whole essay about it that you can find, I believe, on IO9 in one of his books. He really feels that George Lucas gave him his vocation to become a writer, that Star Wars inspired his career. He's a huge stan of Admiral Thrawn, calls him the Sherlock Holmes of the Star Wars universe, and his action figure collection consists of 3 Grand Admiral Thrawn figures, 3 Grand Moff Tarkin figures, 2 Director Orson Krennic figures, and 1 Yuuzhan Vong Executor from the New Jedi Order book series. All of them are villains that are clever, strategic, and a true threat to our heroes of Star Wars. As our conversation continues, we talk more about growing up in Puerto Rico and trying to collect all the original 12 Kenner figures. Also, we talk about what it was like for Javier to see Diego Luna featured in Rogue One, and what it means to have representation in the Star Wars universe. You know, before we go on, I'd like to just have a little fan interaction. I do want to call out 2 and 2 Gaming on Instagram. They said, good show. Thanks for saying that. It's really hard putting these shows. It's not really hard to put these shows together. What am I talking about? But it's just, you know what? If you're like me, you face a lot of self-criticism, and putting a show together like this and putting it out there is just really... it can be unnerving as I fight my own anxiety to get through this. So, 2 and 2 Gaming, thanks for the shout out. And if anyone else wants to jump in on the conversation, you can do so on Twitter or Instagram at Star Wars Mean to You. That's at Star Wars Mean, the number 2 and the letter U. And the next thing is, of course, Mandalorian just aired. I watched it. It's Chapter 19, The Convert. And like I said, first of all, spoiler alert, so I hope you watched it. If not, just skip forward about 30, 40 seconds, and you'll be fine. The other thing I want to say is I'm not a recapper. I said that last episode. I'll say it again. I'll say it every episode. You get me recapping, and it's like a 5-year-old describing a dream they had when they were 2. It's just a useless conversation. But I can give a reaction, and my reaction is pretty positive to The Convert. Here's the thing. It started out with a bang, with this intense chase between TIE interceptors and Mando and Bo-Katan. It's a dogfight for the ages. It was probably one of the best dogfights on Mandalorian. And then it goes into this story about Dr. Pershing, who is the clone scientist who was working with that Moff Gideon in season 1. and wanted Baby Yoda to begin with. Or, as we know now, Grogu. See, this is why I don't recap. Anyway, this was fascinating to me. It's all about him trying to reintegrate into the New Republic. And, he has to go to, probably court-ordered therapy sessions, and he lives in amnesty housing with all these other former Imperials. And he meets this, again, I'm recapping it, but it was fascinating because it's the first time Mandalorian felt like an episode of Andor. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's almost like Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni was watching rough cuts of Andor and went, we can do a little bit of that. We can make that happen. It was great to see. It made the world of The Mandalorian, or the galaxy of The Mandalorian, much bigger. Plus, you got to see the only exposed part of the planet Coruscant, which was a mountaintop coming up to just a square in the city. Also had one of the great callbacks to Return of the Jedi when Dr. Pershing says to Mon Calamari, "It was a trap." And he has this kind of look on his face that wasn't quite a wink to the audience, but it was a, hey, you know the line, come on. I'm a lobster man. He said it to a lobster man. I'm a lobster man. You know the line. It was the perfect kind of fan service, a nice small moment that if you get, you get, and if you don't, no harm, no foul. Now let's get to part 2 of my conversation with Javier Grillo-Marxuach. We pick up where we left off. I'm asking about if he collected any of the Kenner Star Wars figures when he was a kid. And before we go to break, hit the subscribe button. Get in on the conversation on Twitter or Instagram at Star Wars Mean to You. That's at Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now let's get started right after this.
Cinema Craptaculous is your podcast destination for all things movies, good and bad, streaming series, good and bad, and pop culture, good, bad, and the ugly. You get a totally different show every week, such as People Also Watched with Adam, Dave, and Tara. They're 3 industry insiders who always find the hilarity in the big-budget feature and the lesser-known feature you may have missed. There is, of course, the Expanded Universe. This is your place to geek out. John, Doc, and S'more are your geek experts to talk about what's going on in the world of streaming series, movies, superheroes, pretty much any showbiz geek topic, they're going to talk about it. And, of course, there's the show that started it all, Cinema Craptaculous, with Stephanie, John, and Dave. You don't even need to have seen the movies these guys talk about to have a good time. So what are you waiting for? Go and subscribe to Cinema Craptaculous wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.
Did you collect the toys when you were a kid, and what were some of the toys you were obsessed with?
What you have to understand is, so Puerto Rico is an island, a very small island. It's 30 miles by 100 miles, so it's tiny. It's a speck, and everything has to be shipped to Puerto Rico. And because of the Puerto Rico being a colony of the United States and having some very draconian rules about who can actually ship stuff to Puerto Rico. Anything coming to Puerto Rico has to be offloaded in Florida, put on an American ship, and then goes to Puerto Rico. Everything in Puerto Rico is much more expensive, and things like Star Wars action figures were very rare. So to get the original 12, right, was an achievement, in 1978, especially in Puerto Rico. And to get the little base that you could mail order for $3, with the little, sliders that made the figures kind of, turn in a circle. Like that was, So one of the things that happened in Puerto Rico was the moms had like a phone tree, basically. So if a mom went to like the Kmart near San Patricio Plaza, and saw a death squad commander there, like she would pick up the phone, call the other, get back home, no cell phones, obviously. Pick up the phone and call another mom and say, hey, I found the death squad commander here. So, you collected them dribs and drabs because they weren't easy to find. And the hardest one to find was the Jawa. There were no Jawas in Puerto Rico, and then finally the Jawas came to Puerto Rico, and it was like a frenzy. So, it's a very strange version of the story because I was growing up in an American colony with, a certain restrictions on how things got to us. And I remember, and they were hard enough to get. We had a beagle puppy that we got in 78. And I remember there was a day, my parents tell the story to this day. I did not witness this event, but I've heard the story told a billion times. My father is pulling up to our driveway from work, and my mother is just standing on the front stoop of the house with a look of just despair on her face. And my dad comes out of the car and he's like, what happened? Thinking somebody passed away or something. And my mom says the dog ate Darth Vader. And the dog ate my Darth Vader, and it was like a death in the family. I mean, it was not good, you know.
Oh, now I feel like I need to send you a retro Darth Vader.
I've
Yeah,
taken
right.
care of that since. Don't worry about that. I've got 3 Grand Moff Tarkins. I'm covered. By the way, and look, I think those toys were great. I think there was the early Star Wars toys were pretty effing lame, and I remember my crown jewel was a remote control R2D2.
Yes.
And that literally only had 2 remote controls, the one to move forward and the one to go backwards and turn, so you could execute turns with a robot. So I mean, I don't know
with that long antenna that always bent.
Right. Yeah. That was thinner than a coat hanger and
Yeah.
far more fragile. So, I mean, look, I think the toys now are great. Like, you're not going to hear me go like, duh, our toys were less good, so we had to use our imagination. I'm like, no, the kids can get all sorts of crap and use their imaginations,
Yeah.
By the way, the thing I loved most about the end of the Book of Boba Fett, which I kind of love the Book of Boba Fett. Like, I know I know that there was a lot of flaws there,
Yeah.
but I like that last episode was so gonzo. It was literally like Jon Favreau and Robert Rodriguez upended all of their toy bins and said, go to town. Because it was like Star Wars versus the hunter killers from Terminator versus, a kaiju monster, and then when the Rancor dies, it's kind of like Old Yeller, but then you've got like the Seekers from the Matrix are there, with the shields and somehow the biker gang from Quadrophenia shows up. I mean, it was like literally, hey, here's every movie you ever saw in a half hour, and then with the Rancor, it's half kaiju, half King Kong, half Old Yeller. Yes. I mean, that's 3 halves, but that's how weird it is. What a delight! Like I had so much fun watching that last episode of Book of Boba Fett. I was like, you know what? Whatever flaws in the show, you're all forgiven. This is awesome. Right. By the way, how cool is it when Danny Trejo shows up as the Rancor keeper? Like he's like, here's your Rancor. Yes. It's fucking great. Like people complain that like, oh, there's too much fan service here. Like Book of Boba Fett was basically 6 hours of fan service, and it was glorious.
Yes, it was. And you know what? I really think I'm going to pronounce it Tamron Morrison, who plays Boba Fett.
Temura,
he plays all the clones.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic in it.
Yeah.
Just so much fun to watch. I have no idea why I'm enjoying him so much, but I enjoy him so much. And it just may be part of history where he's been with the film series since 2000, playing the original clones. But it was just so much fun to see, even with his dad bod in the Boba Fett suit.
Oh yeah, no, that was great. I love that he's a guy in his probably mid to late 50s. I mean, he's older than I am, I would guess. So he's got to be maybe in his late 50s, and he's got but by the way, I wouldn't want to get in a street fight with Tamura Morrison. That dude's tough.
No, you're gonna lose that.
The funny thing about Book of Boba Fett is that ultimately, when you sit down and really chew down to the bone what that show's about, it's about the redemptive power of like regional government.
Yeah.
It's literally a dude who like says, I've been the worst human being alive. I have killed people. I have enslaved people. I have frozen people in carbonite. I'm a bad man, but if I could be mayor of this town, I'm gonna be redeemed, and you're like, oh, that's good. You just run for mayor. That's what you do, and then suddenly you're a good guy. That's awesome.
That's amazing. It's very funny how the thing everyone complains about with the prequel trilogy being all about politics and boring and stuff are the things that are popping now for us. Like Andor is all political intrigue. Boba Fett is about becoming the mayor of...
Is that what Andor is about? I thought it was just about people talking in very low tones. It's interesting because at the end of the day, I love Andor. Okay.
Yep.
It is flawed in the most classy way possible, in that the scenes are the most beautifully written scenes you'll ever see. I mean, it's a gorgeously written show. And it does come to something at the end. I mean, it's not as much as I would like for it to, but it does come to something at the end of the series, of the first series. And by the way, it stars a Mexican. So already I'm in, because I cried during Rogue One when I heard Diego Luna's accent, I know that other cuter people than I had the same experience and wrote about it. I did as well. But no, I mean, and it's a true experience that I think a lot of Latinx people had watching that movie.
Yes.
It's like, oh my God, like there is room for us in this universe. And I don't count Benicio del Toro in Last Jedi, because I'm like, oh, we finally got a Puerto Rican in Star Wars. Oh, and he's a deadbeat nihilist thief who fucks everyone over. Thanks, guys. I mean, at least Lando got like a 90-second redemption arc, you know?
Yeah. And what he was doing was he's trying to protect the Cloud City people.
Yeah. Like if I were a black person watching Star Wars in 1980 and Empire comes out and I'm like, oh my God, thank God there's a black person here. Oh, wait, he's a oh, no, wait. Okay. You know?
Yeah.
And then and then in Return of the Jedi, he's straight up a good guy and it's great. And then in Solo, he's wonderful. You know, so Lando came out okay. But like, I'm like, oh my God, the Puerto Rican. He's what? Really? Really, guys? So, you know, the fact that as much shit talk as I have about the sequel trilogy, the thing they got right was the representation, you know?
Yes.
And honestly, for the longest time, I sort of haven't really opined about the prequel trilogy, because when the representation is that good, who cares about my trenchant analysis of whether the crystal water, you know? Seeing a black man holding a lightsaber is huge. Seeing an Asian man as Chirrut, you know, and base, that is huge. Seeing Diego Luna is huge. Seeing Daisy Ridley is huge, you know. By the way, Oscar Isaac, who's Guatemalan Cuban, I mean, it's like, come on. Of course, they killed him in the first 15 minutes of The Force Awakens, and somehow while Harrison Ford broke his leg, you know, Oscar Isaac cannily convinced JJ to bring his character back. But I mean, again, the Latinx guy dies 15 minutes into the movie. So, you know.
Yeah.
So Diego Luna is huge, and he lives. Of course, he gets sent to jail because, you know.
He gets sent to jail. Sorry, I feel like the Diego Luna Andor is more the modern day Han Solo more than anyone else from 2015 or 2014 on. He just feels like he has that a real kind of dark swagger, I guess.
Yeah. But it's dark
with a heart of gold. Yeah, but it's dark.
But the thing I loved about Andor, the show, and about Diego Luna specifically playing that character, you know, is that he's playing a rebellious colonial subject of an empire.
Yes.
Latinx people don't have a lot to say about that, by the way. We wouldn't know anything about being the subjects of a colonizing empire. So just adding that political dimension in the show Andor to the character, whether it's what's intended because of his ethnic extraction in the real world, it is incredibly resonant for somebody like me to watch that character. And look, honestly, I perhaps might want him to be a little more like Han Solo in terms of he's very earnest, you know?
Yep.
But that's not a complaint, dude. I love the character, and I'm sad he's gonna die.
That's true. Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Hey, Andor's a prequel to Rogue One, guys.
Yeah. Sorry to say.
Not a sequel. They did not survive that shit.
One of the things with Andor that I've struggled with or thought a lot about is, to me, it feels very Star Wars, yet I can't put my finger on what it is that makes it Star Wars to me. Because is it the design elements, the costumes and the hovels, and because it's not high adventure, it's not a serial adventure. And it's not a lot of space
opera
battles.
It's not, and there's no Jedi in it, so already the entire fantasy spiritual component isn't there. There's also no aliens in it, or barely.
Exactly. It's a very human centric.
By the way, because
story.
Palpatine was a huge racist and favored human beings in all command positions in the Empire. Yeah, that's from the books. So I mean, I get that. I mean, look, I think for me, what does it? There's a scene in Star Wars that I love, and it's the completely wrong scene to love because it's the one that like probably begat all the politics in the prequels. But it's the scene where the Moffs are arguing in the Death Star conference room. You know. And because it gives you a sense of the greater world outside, it opens up a space that was later filled in with senates and politics and that stuff. But just for that movie, it creates it's a huge part of the world building, and it's a dramatic scene. You know, it has exposition about Darth Vader and all that. And I think that for me, the expansion of the Empire in that movie. And I think Dira Miro is an incredible character. I forget. Anyway, that character, the Denise Goff character, is
Oh yes,
phenomenal.
yes, Deirdre. I think her name's
Deidre Miro. Yes, she's phenomenal because she's so good at her job that I root for her. She's evil. I mean, no, she's not evil. She's doing what she thinks is right. I mean, she believes in the Empire, which is evil, but she's somebody who like what she's trying to do is be great at a job that she's good at. And I think that with also the idea that you can take the thing that Andor has done for me that's made Star Wars more interesting is that it has made credible the struggle of the rebellion.
Yep.
In a way that, like I said, at the end of The Last Jedi, it appeared like there's literally the resistance consists of like 10 Shemps in the Millennium Falcon, and somehow between movies they got all their shit back, right? Like literally the entire first 6 hours of Andor are about stealing a payroll so they can bankroll the rebellion. Okay.
Yep.
That makes me see that it was a struggle to get the rebellion, and you see the Empire being, this really, really imposing war machine. The best thing about the finale of Andor, for all of the things in it that are great, and I almost consider it better than the Luthen Rail monologue about telling his dreams to Ghost, which is, by the way, like, if ever there were two people who were the great masters of the regretful middle-aged man monologue, it's Tony Gilroy and Stellan Skarsgård. I mean, Michael Clayton is just a collection of regretful middle-aged men monologues, and they are incredible. And then you get Skarsgård. I mean, did you see his regretful middle-aged man monologue in Chernobyl? It's masterful. No. It's so good. You get him doing a regretful middle-aged man monologue written by Tony Gilroy. Holy crap! It's Shakespeare. It's amazing. But just the idea that, just again, it brings Star Wars back to this idea that this was a struggle.
Yeah.
And that for me is what, I mean, look, there are a few scenes more heartbreaking in all of Star Wars than when Kino Loy says, "I can't swim."
Yes. Yes.
And in things like that, you see that heroes can die. Heroes are not all invulnerable space wizards who can survive a lightsaber hit to the stomach. The biggest lesson from Kenobi, by the way, is that somehow you can survive being impaled by a lightsaber. That's a new thing. Somebody should have mentioned that to Han Solo in The Force Awakens. We might have had a more interesting prequel trilogy, but whatevs.
He didn't have to fall all the way down. He just could have just fallen on the deck and been like, okay. But no,
because apparently, like, two people survived literally being stabbed through the chest with a lightsaber, but apparently the revenge does wonders for your will to live. That's how they papered over that. So anyway.
Yeah.
So Andor. So I think Andor brought back that sense of threat. And again, the thing I was going to say, the best thing in that final episode, the stormtroopers can aim.
Yes.
Did you notice that the stormtroopers actually kill a shit ton of people? Like in Kenobi, you literally have the stormtroopers in a line shooting at point blank at another line of people, and somehow it's a gunfight. In Andor, the stormtroopers are actually good marksmen. Like Obi-Wan says in Star Wars, only Imperial stormtroopers are this precise.
Right.
And it was so frightening because all of a sudden at the end of Andor, I'm like, oh my God, get away from the stormtroopers. They can shoot now. It's an upgrade. That's how they
have aiming capability.
Yeah, that's how they fooled you all this time. They lulled you into a false sense of security, but they're actually good at it. They're not left-handed.
Neither are the rebellion. So
that's true.
One of the things I think that has been an overarching, like, I keep thinking, what is Star Wars? And one of the things that it's the story of oppression. It's always someone is being oppressed by someone else, and fighting that oppression. And I think that I think what you're saying about Andor, how it showed that it was a struggle, is quite true, and that's what makes it kind of fit into the Star Wars sensibility.
I think what's really interesting about Star Wars in general is you look at the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy, right? And look, George Lucas was going to direct Apocalypse Now. He was, I mean, the plan was, I mean, it's a crazy plan, but the plan was to send him and a skeleton crew to Vietnam during the war to shoot there, documentary style, which is insane. He tells the story in Hearts of Darkness in the documentary. George Lucas is somebody who grew up watching probably all of America's triumphalist post-World War II media, all of those John Wayne war movies and TV shows and F Troop and all of that stuff. He probably grew up watching that. And then he was a child of the counterculture. He came of age during the counterculture in the 60s. So Star Wars is profoundly countercultural. I mean, his whole idea for the end of the first movie was that the Death Star was going to be felled by an attack of Wookiees, because he liked the idea that a species in Star Wars, obviously, that was not necessarily more primitive, but more in touch with the land, more in touch with their home, with their capacities, and how their homeland was theirs to defend, and all of that could defeat this mechanized war machine. That's counterculture. That's the Viet Cong. That's somebody who was watching that war and seeing what the Viet Cong were doing, and who had a real opinion about it. So the thing I find really interesting is how few Americans realize that Vietnam War America is the empire.
Yes.
And Richard Nixon is Palpatine. By the way,
Palpatine didn't tape all his conversations.
Which makes Gerald Ford Snoke, which I think is hilarious. But anyway, because they were both about as effective. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is,
well, Gerald Ford was cut down in half in the middle of his
his presidency,
inflation,
cut down in half,
terrorism,
by Spiro Agnew, I believe. But anyway, no, but I mean, it's like that political dimension of Star Wars was always there, And I think that Andor sort of brings it back in a really interesting way. And look, I think we talk about how, the sequel trilogy seems to have very little understanding of military strategy, of how, this mechanized villainous war machine can actually put the screws on the good guys, how the good guys can actually use strategy to get out of it and things like that. Look, even Han Solo going into the asteroid belt is a piece of strategy, Han Solo being able to clamp the Millennium Falcon to the back of the Star Destroyer, the rebels mounting a ground counterattack with their speeder so that they can buy time for their, like I said, it's not like they read the works of General Patton, but they have some knowledge of how these things break out and why battles are interesting, and how you can make cinematic battles interesting. And I think that when you look at the prequel trilogy, part of that is you're looking at people whose idea of war was shaped by A, Star Wars, and B, the Iraq War, which was a war almost, like there was a lot of on the ground action. It was not covered by the news. We didn't get to see it. We didn't get to see the cost of it. And what we actually saw in the news was the digital warfare of drones and night vision and all of that. So I think that there's a lot sort of that happens politically between the prequel trilogy, the original trilogy, and sort of the popular culture and the culture that shaped George Lucas versus the culture that shaped Generation X. And we're the ones who made the prequel trilogy. So I think you can see a lot of our sort of generational gaps in our understanding of the world in the prequel trilogy.
Going back to what you were saying earlier, the cancer on the soul of Generation X.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And look,
That's
there's
true.
a lot of Gen X writers who are unaware of Star Wars, and they're wonderful writers, and they don't write about this stuff. But I think, look, a lot of us wanted to write genre. And I think the biggest challenge for me has been to grow up and say, you know what, I love Star Wars and I love all the crap I grew up with, but I need to understand the human condition better than these people did who shaped my childhood,
Yeah.
And by the way, and I'm not saying I'm good at it. If you had handed me Star Wars 10 years ago, I don't know that I might have made a better movie than The Force Awakens, given all of the limitations, all of the things that were. I mean, I think that's the hard part. It's like, I judge the sequel trilogy harshly dramaturgically, but then I also think of, okay, you've got the entire world looking at you. They didn't like Michael Arndt's scripts. They hand you 10 characters they've already created and sets that are already being built and tell you to make a movie out of it. Making The Force Awakens out of that is kind of heroic, actually. And you got to commend J.J. Abrams and Jake Kasdan, for being able to just pull it off, Not Jake Kasdan, Lawrence Kasdan, coming back and doing that. Yeah. But it's still a movie that feels like it needed more time to think itself through, and to kind of figure out what it was really about. And I think the entire sequel trilogy sort of suffers from that.
I agree. It was almost like a prequel to its own movies, whereas like the workshopping of the characters and the story to get to that next place where it's like, okay, this is where it begins.
And look, you see it with Harrison Ford breaking his leg. You listen to the interviews J.J. Abrams gave about that, and it's like, like it gave him time to rethink a bunch of things in the script and rewrite and bring Poe Dameron back, for example. So I think that that's a movie that could have used a little more time in the oven, to be honest with you. But they just didn't have the time.
No, and one of the things I think that is hard for the general public to understand is how kind of collaborative
Mhm.
A movie like Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and
Mhm.
Rise of Skywalker are in that you have Lucasfilm Limited having kind of a say. You have Disney kind of having a
Mhm.
say. You have actors who want to perform in a particular way. You have a director
You
who
have a
wants
script that was
to,
already commissioned that has parts in it that
yes,
people already like that you have to incorporate.
yes. And to me, it's a modern miracle that any movie gets made,
Oh
much
yeah.
less something that costs $200 million to make.
Well, the title of the documentary in about the Phantom Menace and the Phantom Menace extras in the DVD is called "Movies Don't Get Released, They Escape."
Yes.
And I think that's very true. And I think with the prequel trilogy, again, you're talking about movies that had dates that they had to make. It's going to be a baffling mystery to me and to a lot of people my age, and under and over, like how they made this trilogy without having the filmmakers actually talk to each other and really
Yeah.
coordinate and actually
Yes.
have a cohesive story. But they had to make these movies at a certain time frame. Disney had profit goals and things. Movies are made that way nowadays, and
Yeah.
those are the movies that came out.
So I just have a couple more questions.
Sure.
One of what is your favorite Star Wars memory?
It's funny. I don't think you can beat the first time. It's very different to consume Star Wars now than it is to
Mhm.
consume Star Wars before, when there was no Star Wars and then suddenly there was Star Wars. I have two Star Wars memories that are my best Star Wars memory. One of them is just coming out of the first movie and having seen it for the first time, having lived in 7 years in the pre-Star Wars world and suddenly seeing Star Wars and seeing that explosion of creativity, of energy, of vitality, of optimism, seeing like the classical music my father listened to that I found so boring suddenly being interesting to me because John Williams' score is so evocative of so much classical composition,
Yeah.
of realizing that VFX could look good and could look realistic, of seeing a world and having things like when C-3PO says the spice mines of Kessel, like I don't have to see them to imagine them, and that opens your imagination in a huge way. So just the exhilaration of having watched Star Wars for the first time, which I think is a truly unique thing to my generation, in terms of how we experienced this pop cultural phenomenon. And the other
Yeah.
one is I had a job as a network executive at NBC, and one of the shows I worked on was Sequest. And Mark Hamill did a couple of guest shots on that show. So I went to Florida with an EPK crew to do some interviews, and I got to interview Mark Hamill. And his character just happened to be wearing a very long brown cloak. So they finished his shooting, and I was waiting in the launch bay set of Sequest. And the launch bay has a massive round gate, that's futuristic round gate that so literally the first time I ever saw Mark Hamill in person, he was walking in from a dark hallway, right, into this lit corridor with this round futuristic gate, right, wearing a brown cloak, and he had
Oh.
his fingers interlaced with his two point fingers like this, and the fingers sort of against his chin, I mean, like in this sort of pensive gesture. And I was like, this is the best day of my life. I don't even have to talk to this guy, you know?
You were like, I'm done.
I have another one, but it's under an NDA. I can't tell it to you. There's something that
Oh,
happened to me at the ranch. I can tell you when you turn off the recording that
okay.
is probably the greatest Star Wars memory anyone can never tell.
Okay. I can't wait. I'm gonna rush through this now.
Okay.
Uh,
Hey, I could do this all day. I mean, it's talking about Star Wars. This is basically what I would be doing anyway. So,
yeah, right. There's a lot of stuff coming up.
Mhm.
What are you excited about, and what do you want to see in Star
Mhm.
Wars in the future?
I don't anymore. And it's
Nice.
incredibly freeing, and I
Yes.
don't mean that in a bad way, like I hate Star Wars now. Blah, blah, blah. No, I mean it like, look, I love Star Wars, and I have made my peace with that, and I have also been able to kind of move on and not have it be the totality of my life. And I think loving Star Wars the way that I do, and for long as I have, it's like now I'm at a point where like we live in an age of like, I mean, you have an idea. A lot of people don't, of what it's like living in a drought of Star Wars. Those
Yes.
those years between Return of the Jedi
Yes.
and Phantom Menace, you know, the years between Empire and Jedi, or Star Wars and Empire,
Yes.
was just nothing. You know, there were two Alan Dean Foster novels. There was
Right.
like, you know, Han Solo's Revenge, and, you know, Lando Calrissian and the Mine Harp of the Sharu. I mean, it was like, those were lean years. You know,
Yeah. Yes,
there
they
wasn't a
were.
book being released every month and 5 comic book series and 5 series in the pipeline. So the great thing about this age of Star Wars abundance is that there's a Star Wars for everybody. You
Right.
know,
Yes.
if you're over 50, you got Andor. You know, maybe people under 50 like Andor, but I mean, Andor was made for regretful middle-aged men. You know, like, that's why that monologue is awesome. You know, if you wanted Gonzo, you got Book of Boba Fett, and that's just no holds barred. Everything goes to the wall, and just, you know, hope for the best. If you want a Western, you've got The Mandalorian. You know, if you want a story of religious redemption, you've got Obi-Wan Kenobi, which, frankly, you know what? It's pretty terrific. And
Yes.
and the last hour of Obi-Wan gave us a complete mulligan on the last fight in Revenge of the Sith, which, even I think the last fight in Revenge of the Sith is really fantastic, but it's also so big that, like, you kind of lose sense of scope. And they just gave us the little indie film personal version of that battle. And by the way, how satisfying is it to watch Obi-Wan grab the hilt of his own lightsaber and fucking smash the
Yes.
the panel on Darth Vader's chest like a pummel? I mean, it was wonderful. So satisfying. Almost as satisfying as in Jedi, when Luke finally just unloads on Darth Vader. And you know, and the only thing wrong with that scene, by the way, is that the fight choreography isn't great. But one of the things I thought was really interesting about that, by the way, and this is why I love that there's so much Star Wars, you know, like, when they brought Luke back on Mandalorian, his fighting style, you know, you watch the fighting styles in even in Obi-Wan, you know, with his fight with Anakin in that one episode where they do the flashbacks and all of that. All of the Jedi have very sophisticated fighting styles, and they're based, you know, there are 5 basic forms, obviously. You know, there's the Ataru, you know, but like, and then Luke, they actually gave him the same kind of smash mouth, self-taught, you know, just hammer away at Darth Vader till he quits, you know.
Yes.
And it was, and so I really enjoyed that. So, you know what, it's just like, there's so much Star Wars, and you just get to sit back and see what they come up with. I've really lost my desire, you know, look, if they come a knocking tomorrow, I'm not going to say no. Okay? But I've kind of lost that burning desire to, oh my God, I hope I get a Star Wars, you know.
Yeah.
There's people doing it who are doing a great job with it. You know, look, one of my favorite pieces of television in the last 10 years was The Queen's Gambit. And I love The Queen's Gambit because I love Walter Tevis's novels. And The Queen's Gambit was probably my favorite book forever. And I watched the TV series, and I went to my shelf, and I took my copy of The Queen's Gambit out of it, and I took it to the little neighborhood library, and I put it in there, and I left it there. Because I hated the show? No, because the show was so good that I was like, they got someone better than me to do this. Thank God. And I can just sit here and enjoy it, you know? And that's kind of how I feel about Star Wars. It's like, you know, I want to see what a bunch of different people do. I want to see it. I want to see non-Gen X creators start dealing with Star Wars. I want to see millennials and Gen Z writers start to come of age and start dealing with Star Wars from their point of view. There's a wonderful person who works with me on The Witcher, and she's the writer's assistant this season, right? And she is a hardcore Star Wars fan who came of age with the prequels, you know? So her entire point of view, she loves the prequels. She doesn't have the problems I have with the prequels. They were the first Star Wars she saw, and she loves them. And I love that about her, you know?
Yeah.
And I want to see that point of view of people who aren't just, oh my God, we saw Star Wars, it changed our lives, it made us want to be filmmakers. I want to see the point of view of people who are like, we saw Star Wars, it was always in the popular culture, it's the air we breathe, and here's how we respond to that. So I think there's such a bright future for Star Wars, and I just can't wait to see what they do. And look, there's going to be a lot of it is going to be terrible, and a lot of it, and some of it is going to be great.
It's better than being in 1988 and sitting around going, I guess I could watch the VHS of Ewok.
Of the Ewok of Caravan of Courage,
Yeah.
that I taped off of ABC with my hand on the remote so I could cut out the commercials, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, those were lean years, you know. And but you know what? It's like, it's just great now, and there's just so much of it, and some of it is going to be great, and you just get to sit back and watch people, you know, and it's just wonderful. And you know, look, I haven't given up my Star Wars books. I don't buy a lot of them anymore, but I mean, it's just Star Wars is the Western, you know, like literally Star Wars occupies the place in popular culture now that the Western occupied in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. You know, it is an idealized version of America, of an America that can believe in itself, even though it's doing all sorts of awful stuff out in the world. And I think Star Wars has kind of become that, you know, everybody knows it. Everybody knows the basics of it. Anybody can sit and watch a Star Wars and kind of understand it. And it genuinely feels like its own genre now, you know?
Yeah, it totally feels like its own genre. Like it's this world where genre can happen within it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't ever want to see a Star Wars musical, for the love of God. You know, I don't ever want to see like there's stuff like, but you know, like, look, I have friends, you know, who are my age who, you know, read The Courtship of Princess Leia, right? You know, with Prince Isolde of the Hapes cluster. And it's about her romance with Han and sort of the love triangle between her and Isolde. And that book is a straight up romance novel with some action smattered in. And now you have that element in Star Wars. You know, you have it like there are Star Wars novels being written now that are drifting off of that idea that Star Wars can be romantic, it can be comedic, it can be serious, you know, and it's wonderful. I just, you know, and I love reading the Timothy Zahn. I mean, look, the Timothy Zahn Thrawn books are now basically about the internal politics of the Chiss ascendancy.
Yes.
I mean, that's some deep cut stuff over there, you know, and they're great. Because the star is evil Sherlock Holmes. I just think of him as Benedict Cumberbatch for blue, you know? It's great. Abundance is awesome. And anybody who's complaining about Star Wars right now, I'm like, dude, just wait 5 weeks. There'll be another one. And maybe you'll like that one. What's to get angry? Like, I get it. I'm crap talking the prequels and all that stuff. But am I angry?
I think there's some, like, it took me a while, but I found some things I really like about the prequels, and it's taken me a while, and I found myself liking some things about the sequels.
There's tons of things to like in the prequels, and there's tons of things to like in the sequels. Absolutely. Like, look, the fight with Kylo Ren and Rey against the Red Guards is phenomenal. It's one of the best fight scenes I've ever seen. The problem with it is that what that fight is trying to prove dramatically had already happened, so you could actually cut the fight out of the movie and there would be no change in the plot of the movie. That's a dramatic flaw, but the fight is awesome, you know? And as is everything that leads up to it. Kylo Ren splitting Snoke in half, it's great. I mean, there are sequences in those movies that are phenomenal. Look, I like the sequence in Rise of Skywalker where they're on the desert skitters and like they're like, they fly now. They fly now. Oh, they fly now. I mean, wonderful bit. It's so funny. You know, it's so endearing. It makes me like those characters in ways that, you know, the other movies don't make me like them as much. I mean, Finn fighting the traitor guy, that's awesome. You know, traitor. It's great. You know, come on. So, yeah, no, those movies are full of delightful things as well.
So my final question for you. Mm-hmm. You go to Skywalker Ranch, and there at the gates, George Lucas greets you. What do you say to him?
I don't say anything. You know what? I don't. I think actually my story about the ranch has to do with an encounter with George Lucas.
Oh, no.
And one of the great things about that story is that I didn't get to meet George Lucas. I love the man. I honestly do. And I have read so much about him. I've seen him interviewed everywhere. It's like, you know, Mark Maron did a comedy bit about like Mick Jagger, right? What do you say to Mick Jagger? Hey, Mr. Jagger, big fan. I just like, wow, right? I mean, no, I know you hear that a lot, but I mean it. Big fan. What the hell do I have to say to George Lucas? You know, it's like, I mean, my entire career is a love note of gratitude for what he gave me as a child. I put a Star Wars reference in the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, and it's one of 2 pop culture jokes in that entire series. That's it. There's 2. There's a race called the Aratham Ascendancy, which is a thing about the Chiss, and there's a character named Rakir, which is an anagram for Riker. Those are the only 2 pop culture jokes in the Dark Crystal, and one of them's a Star Wars joke because I put it in there. I have, you know, like, I mean, I would smile and I would let him have his peace because, for God's sake, the man has suffered enough for our sins. You know? There's a movie called The People versus George Lucas, and it's entirely people of my generation bitching about the prequels. For God's sake, you know? No, just, you know, but somebody in that movie actually does say George Lucas is a saint. And you know what happens when you see a saint? They blind you with their greatness and you sort of turn away like, Harrison Ford at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. He knows I'm grateful. He probably sees me. He goes like, "You're 53-year-old. You have thick glasses and a black T-shirt. I know your spiel." I'm like, "Great."
It's just funny because I have thick glasses and a black T-shirt on right now myself.
As do I.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like, look, he knows we love him. He also knows how much some of us hated him, and it makes me sad when he gave an interview where they say, why did you sell Star Wars? And he's like, well, I like spent a big chunk of my life making these movies, and then people come out of the woodwork to tell me what a horrible person I am.
It's like that line from Batman: "You live long enough to become the villain."
Yeah. You either die here or live long enough to. But you know what? And again, it's like I look at my friend and coworker who loves the prequels, and I look at the day I stopped being angry about the prequels, because I had that Gen X disease of prequel. You know what? I was talking to this friend of mine, a wonderful, wonderful writer, named Charles Murray, and the prequels come up, and I started my usual the prequels, and he goes, you know what? I saw The Phantom Menace with my 7-year-old, and he thought it was the greatest movie ever. And I was like, you know what? I can't be angry about the prequels ever again, because somebody saw them before they saw a lot of other movies, before they had the critical frame of reference that I have, and they loved it. And it made them want to be something. It made them it gave them joy. Who am I to trash talk that,
You're Javier.
I mean, I've trash talked it plenty. I think you've heard some of it here. But and again, you look, part of that essay that I wrote, again, is just sort of about coming to terms with what the original trilogy did for me is done. It's there. It's in my soul. It's like that can't be taken away.
No.
And look, one of the best things that's happened in terms of, so I'm working on the show The Witcher, right? And I love the show. And there's a lot of back and forth about, are we faithful enough to the books or not, And there's an interview with Andrzej Sapkowski where he's like, these are different artists to me. My books, they're right over there on the shelf, and these are different artists. I can't criticize their interpretation of it. They're doing their thing. I did my thing, And I think, part of growing up is you go, you know what? I didn't like it, but that doesn't make it junk,
Yes. And that kind of piece, I think, brings and you said it's such a joy to just enjoying Star Wars again, and not being angry about it, not being holding it against itself. It is a pleasure to just turn on Disney Plus and have a rainbow of Star Wars to choose from.
Right. And look at it's exactly that. It's like, it's really, and it's really easy for somebody who's not a fan, or somebody who wasn't influenced by Star Wars the way that I was and that you were, in that it's shaped literally our professional lives. It's really easy for people on the outside to say, well, it's just a movie. But it's not just a movie. It is the dominant force in our popular culture. It is almost a religion. It is literally a part of our popular culture that has not gone away for 40 to 50 years. It is ever present. It is, people, it's funny because, like, you still every once in a while on a Twitter bio or something, somebody go, I'm a geek, I like Star Wars. And I'm like, no, you just like stuff that's popular. You're not a geek. You just like things that are out there in the mainstream media. And that's what Star Wars is. Star Wars is to modern popular culture what the Western used to be. And so it's not just a movie. It is something that influenced millions of people. It is something that created an entire generation of storytellers. It is something that gives people incredible pleasure. And I think, a lot of people in my generation, look, if you read Ain't It Cool during the prequel era, you know how complicated our relation, you look at RoboGeek and Moriarty having arguments about how they can cope with the prequels being so terrible, and how they're going to live their lives, and it's look, it's like, this is a huge part of our lives. And there are psychological accommodations you have to make sometimes for it falling short, but that's just living. That's no different from just life itself.
Exactly. I mean, it's literally forgiving your parents for being human.
Yeah. And you know what? It's like, look, you can trash talk Uncle George as much as you want, but at the end of the day, the Obi-Wan versus General Grievous fight in Revenge of the Sith is pretty darn cool.
Yeah,
You know,
a lot
the,
of
the
fun.
duel at the end of the duel at the end of Phantom Menace is in and of itself like a great movie. You know, the pod race is a wonderful sequence. I don't know what it accomplishes
Yeah.
dramatically, but it's a great sequence.
But
Like
yeah, it is.
we've still been given like this wonderful collection of characters and ships and worlds and situations. It's lovely, you know, and you have to make your peace with it and just enjoy it, you know.
Yeah, I agree. And on that, Javi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is there where can people find you on the social?
Oh, so yeah, my handle is OKBJGM. The letters OKBJGM, my initials, and that's my Twitter handle. That's my Instagram handle, and it's also my website. And look, I want to plug my website. My website, if you're a fledgling writer,
Please.
I have a lot of pitches, story bibles, documents, outlines, scripts from shows I've worked on, and all that are downloadable. They're there for fledgling storytellers to be able to see how I do what I do. I'm not saying I'm great at it, but just to see another professional and how I do. So I really like to plug that, just because so many people who are into Star Wars also are storytellers, want to be in this trade, you know. So I'm plugging it in the hopes that somebody will find that material useful.
And I read your essay book, Shoot This One.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the second one's Shoot That One.
Yes. If I do a third, it'll be called Shoot the Other One.
And the fourth one will be Go Home.
Yeah, I'm done.
But no, you are a fantastic writer about the act of writing and about
Thank
the
you.
act of creating. And I encourage anyone to who's interested in writing or what it's like in the entertainment industry to follow you and to dig into everything you offer, because you do give such an amazing voice to what the realistic world of the La La world is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. No, I appreciate that. That's very kind of you. And I'm trying to give away as much knowledge as I can for free.
Thank you. And with that, thanks for telling us what Star Wars means to you. I need a sign off. I don't know if that's it yet, but we'll go with that for the moment.
Okay. When the light
Thanks
goes off,
again.
I'll tell you my story.
Yes.
Thank you.
So that's what Star Wars means to Javier Grillo-Marxuach. Tell me what you think. What kind of genre would you like to see the Star Wars universe? Is Thrawn one of the best Star Wars villains? Let me know on Twitter or Instagram at Star Wars Mean to You. That's at Star Wars Mean, the number 2 and the letter U. And join me next week when I talk to Jennifer Chapman Gallego. She's an avid Clone Wars fan, a Mandalore lore expert, and has a great POV on Star Wars droids. Until then, the Force will be with you, always. Hi, this is Dave, and before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners. And that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 and the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars.